مولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The first quality or trait of a successful mu'min is that they are humble in their prayers. The second quality was that they stay away from and avoid anything useless and anything that's a waste of their time that doesn't lead to their spiritual purification and spiritual growth. And we ended this discussion saying that there are things that are time wasters as lagh is concerned, generally speaking. And the riwayat as well, lagh is sometimes described as music. So we went through some of the fatwa of the major maraji' of what exactly constitutes haram music and halal music. We also talked about what do we say to someone, or what do we say if we ourselves believe that even haram music doesn't affect us. So we just described simply the physical detriments and the problems physically that our nervous system would be affected by involuntarily by listening to certain types of sounds. And of course, spiritually speaking, it's a whole other discussion. So simply saying that I don't feel like I'm affected by music is not a good argument, no, not scientifically and not spiritually. So we move on to the next ayah. The next ayah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. So it's those who, regarding zakah, are fa'il. Now let me see how they translate it over here. Are givers of poor rate. Another terrible translation. Oh, great. Okay. That's okay, no problem. So the word zakah we've heard many times before, right? Now, there's different ways that this word has its meaning, right? In different realms of Islamic ideology, it has a different meaning. So very specifically in the first realm regarding Islamic law, right? Which it seems as being indicated over here, paying zakah, paying the poor rate as is mentioned over here. So sometimes when we think about the zakah, we think about it in terms of just paying that wajib zakah that is due upon us. The other way that it's described is more related to one of the derivative forms of zakah, which is tazkiyah, tazkiyatun nafs. So zakah itself, in that meaning, in terms of akhlaq and irfan, talks about specifically cleanliness and purification. That's usually the meaning we're more associated with and the one that we're more familiar with, right? And so the reason that they attach this meaning of paying a wajib tax and zakah also having this meaning of purification is this. They say in the same way you have wudu, which is a purification, and ghusl, purification for the body. You have salah, which is a purification of the soul. You also have zakah, which is a purification of your property, of your wealth. Right? Are one of the different ways and types of ways that you can purify your money and your wealth. Our question here is this: what exactly is the meaning of zakah in this verse? What are they talking about here? It could mean, as this translation indicates, it's just paying the wajib zakah. Or it could mean purification. So we need to figure out exactly what it means. So the main crux of our discussion today will be about figuring out what are the different interpretations for the meaning of zakah in this verse. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad wa ajil farajum. Now before we get into specifically the meaning in this verse, let's go back to the word zakah itself, right? As we mentioned with some of the other words like falah, when we talked about falah, although translated right now as success, the original meaning had to do with digging, tilling, and cultivating land. And it was describing the way that a farmer achieves success, right? Over here, zakah itself is also related to this same idea. So sometimes they'll talk about zakah az-zar'. Zakah sometimes in the classical meaning in Arabic is talking about growth or progression. Whenever a growth or progression or development takes place in something. So in the classical Arabic, zakah was meant to talk about crops. Whenever your crops would begin to grow and show growth and development, you would use the verb zakah for it. So in this same way, it's very interesting that zakah is also mentioned here, talking about our 5-point success plan. Regarding a farmer trying to achieve success in the goal that they have in mind. So keep this in mind as we start to go through the different interpretations of this verse. So the first view that some of our mufassirin bring is that zakah here is talking about the wajib zakah. The wajib zakah that we have to pay, right? That's part of the furu' ad-din. So over here they say, look, salah and zakah are basically these two friends, these two companions that are inseparable. Where we see in many verses of Quran, right? وَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. You have to uphold the prayer and you have to give your zakah. They say, look, the same thing is happening in this verse too. In this verse, in the beginning, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. So Allah talked about salah, and now over here, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. So it's the same concept. In those other verses, it's talking about wajib prayers, and it's also talking about wajib zakah that you have to pay. So it should be the same over here, right? So this is what the first group is claiming. And they also bring, as far as their evidence, some narrations. So I'll share one which is attributed to our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil fajr. So over here it says, Man mana'a qiratan min az-zakah, falaysa huwa bimu'min, wala muslim, wala kirama. Whoever stops somebody from paying their zakah, that wajib tax, they're not a mu'min, they're not even a Muslim, and they have no kirama. There's no dignity, there's no nobility in this person whatsoever. You know, sometimes what happens to us is when it comes to these types of duties, usually the discussion happens regarding khums, not so much zakah, and this we'll discuss a bit later on, inshallah. But we get in the habit of trying to block people from paying things and giving out some of their wealth. And what happens is we come up with our own justifications, right? That how do you know that your wealth is actually going to be spent in the right way? How do you know that this organization that you're giving money to will actually do what they're supposed to do? How do you know that this daftar, this office of the scholar, of the marja, is actually spending the money in the best way possible? How do you know that they're doing their due diligence and research? So a lot of individuals try to cause this doubt in the communities. Now, of course, we should know that yes, you should be doing your research. You should have a sense of certainty in the organizations that you're giving to. And right now, especially in the West, we have all these Western charity organizations. And there are research organizations and institutes which try to show that, look, a lot of these organizations, a good amount, if not the majority of the money that we're giving to them, is actually going into their pockets. They're actually not giving it out to those who are in need. So you can go and research yourself and see which organizations are actually spending a majority amount of their money to help out others, and how much of the money are they spending on their own overhead costs. Now we ourselves can do the same thing, right? There's many charities, Muslim charities, Islamic charities, which try to spend money, for example, in Yemen, or in Syria, or in Iraq, or Iran. So you have to be able to do your own due diligence and research, find out where can you spend your money so that it's actually going to a good cause. Don't think that we shouldn't think that we can just give it to any sort of charity without doing research, right? This is not a way that a mu'min should go about doing that. Now, this is different than blocking somebody from their wajib duty, whether it's about zakah or khums. To say, listen, don't do your wajib duty because we don't know where it's going. You don't know if they're going to spend it in the best manner possible. We have to ask these questions. What is our actual duty in paying this zakah and this khums? If we know that it's going to a credible scholar, right? They've done their due diligence, it's going to them. Now, if it ends up getting spent in the wrong way because of, let's say, some misappropriation later on, are we really accountable for that or not? So some of our scholars say this: if you've done research and you trust the individual or the organization that you're paying your khums or zakah or sadaqah to, then that's enough for you. If for whatever reason later on they misuse and abuse the funds, well, it's out of your hands, right? You did what you could and you spent it based on your own research and you trusted them. If something happens later down the line, then, this is something that kind of, I don't want to say God intended, but it's out of your reach, it's out of your hands. that should not be itself a block for us to do something. Now think about this. We all expect perfection from financial organizations, I think, right? We want them to be the best. And okay, to some degree, maybe that makes sense. But do we hold, or were the imams held to those same standards? And do we hold the imams to the same standards? Look at the government of Amirul Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Was his government a perfect government? Were those who are in charge of his treasury perfect individuals? Were they infallibles? Were they ma'asum? Were those who he put in charge of different provinces, right, the governors, were they infallible individuals? Or were they subject to sin and corruption and misappropriation of funds? Now, anybody who's gone through Nahj al-Balagha, even parts of it, and it's a good reminder for us, I think, right? Many of our scholars advise, we probably have gone through the Quran multiple times, but have we actually gone through Nahj al-Balagha once over? Nahj al-Balagha is full of certain wisdoms that we can't get anywhere else. Right? So it's good for us to see if we can go through that, especially if we can find a tafsir or an explanation of these wisdoms there. So in Nahj al-Balagha, you see a lot of the letters that the Imam is writing is to the governors that he's appointed himself, saying, why are you abusing the funds? If you continue to abuse funds like this, I'll remove you from your position and I'll punish you with a harsh punishment. So by the Imam's own admission in Nahj al-Balagha, through those letters attributed to him, we see that, look, even in the Imam's government there was corruption, there was misappropriation and abuse of funding. So why do we think that we can hold current Islamic governments or current Islamic institutions to a higher standard? The people still gave out their khums, they gave their zakah, the money went to the Baytul Mal, but the Imam, as the leader of that, the Khalifa, the Caliph, he made sure to try to curb corruption and misappropriation and abuse as much as possible. But it's not a perfect world. So we have to be realistic in our expectation of these organizations. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So this was the first opinion, right? That look, this zakah that's being discussed in this verse is the wajib zakah and tax that we have to pay. Now some mufassirin, some ulama say, look, this can't be what it means. Why? They say, look, this surah, Surah Al-Mu'minun, was revealed in Makkah. It's a Makki surah, according to most. As far as we know, when were most of the narrations or the obligations, the wujub and the wajib obligations revealed? Were they in Makkah or Medina? And our scholars say, look, Makkah was more for usul ad-din and theology, but Medina is where the laws actually were sent down. That's where you get the Medinan surahs, right? Actually talking about the wajibat, muharramat, mustahabbat, and makruhat. So they say it doesn't make sense that you can have a Makki surah saying there's a wajib thing that you have to pay. It doesn't make sense with our Islamic ideology. And they say that specifically we have other narrations which say that the wujub, the obligation for paying zakat, was revealed in Medina, not in Makkah. So it doesn't seem like this view holds much weight. So this was our first view. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So the second view says, okay, we understand zakah means to give out some money, and in some contexts it means to give out this wajib amount of zakah, but maybe over here what it's discussing is that you're giving out general charity and sadaqah, not the simple wajib amount of zakah that we have to give out. So it's any type of charity that we pay. So over here they bring some evidence and some narrations, one which is attributed to Sayyidah Fatima alayha salatu wasalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Where they say, she's narrated to have said that Allah made Iman as a means to purify you from shirk, Salah as a means for you to keep away from takabbur and pride, and made the zakah and sadaqah and paying and helping out the poor individuals obligatory and wajib for purifying our soul and our heart, and also to increase our rizq. So over here they say, look, sometimes in narrations and some of the verses of Quran talk about the wajib zakah, but over here this is talking about just general charity that we have to give out. When Allah has blessed them with a certain amount of wealth, they purify their wealth by giving out as much as they can to those in need. So what's the objection over here? The objection over here is the ending part of the verse, right? It says, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. Literally translating as, and those whom regarding zakah are fa'il. Now fa'il over here doesn't mean paying. It doesn't mean giving out. Fa'il just means being active. So fa'ilun are those who are active. So they say, look, if Allah wanted to talk about those who pay and give out charity, He would have used that verb. He's not using that verb here. He's talking about something different. He's talking about being active regarding zakah. So how can it mean giving out zakah? You're taking the meaning and stretching it into a place where it doesn't belong. And sometimes you see this, right, when individuals, especially those who, let's say, don't understand Arabic, what they try to do is they have their own preconceived bias and preconceived notions about what Islam should be. And then when they go into the Quran, they squeeze and stretch and abuse the meanings of those verses so that they can get whatever they want out of it. Right? And Allah says there's a zayg, right? There's an impurity within people's hearts when they make these kinds of interpretations. They try to do this, their own ta'wil in the Quran. When we say this ta'wil, the true understanding only lies with the rasikhun, meaning those who are purified, those Ahlul Bayt, and the information which has been passed down from the Ahlul Bayt to our ulama. So they say this second view can't apply here. So then we come to the third view. And the third view is what? Is that this zakah here is talking about tazkiyatun nafs. It's actually talking about purifying ourselves. So let's open up this discussion now with the sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So going back to what we said originally, we said zakah and its original meaning is what? Zakah az-zar'. The crops are being developed, the crops are growing, the crops are showing growth and promise, right? They're progressing. So this classical original meaning for zakah is about growth. If you take this meaning and apply it over here, it's now, what does it mean? If you put all of it together, it's talking about those, meaning the successful mu'mineen are those who what? They are active regarding their purification of themselves. Now this makes much more sense when we take into consideration the other verses, right? In the first verse, when it was about salah, it wasn't those who were performing salah. It wasn't just praying. It was those who, regarding their salah, were humble. The second was those who were, in regards to things which are a waste of time, they keep away from it altogether. They avoid it. So now it's not simply about engaging in purification once in a while. This quality, the third quality of a successful mu'min is what? According to this view, it's that those regarding their tazkiyatun nafs, they are constantly active. Fa'il or fa'ilun over here is a plural usage of somebody who is constantly, day by day, minute by minute, they are actively trying to purify themselves. And the mufassirin, they open it up even more. They say, look, this lam that's in front of zakah, liz-zakati fa'ilun. Some say this lam is showing that, okay, it's regarding zakat, they are fa'il. Regarding zakat, they are active. But they say, look, that's not what it means here. When you take this lam and you put it in front of zakah, and you're talking about somebody being active, they say this is lam al-illa. It's a ta'leel and it's a qasd. That the reason we are, emergency broadcast system? Oh no. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Are we okay? Is there a flood coming? What's going on? All right? Amber there? Okay. Inshallah, may Allah help us all. Khair. When we're constantly trying to purify ourselves, what's the reason? What's the goal for purification? We said in the beginning we had this 5-point plan for a successful individual, right? Like this farmer. The first point that we had to remember is what exactly is our vision and our goal. If our vision and our goal is not appropriate, it's not proper, then the method that we undertake is not going to make sense as well. So we have to make sure our vision and our goal is established properly. So over here, it's as if Allah is saying, look, for those who are active in purifying themselves, well, what's the reason? Why are they purifying themselves? We can purify ourselves for many reasons. We can be actively purifying ourselves because we want to show off to other individuals. We can actively purify ourselves because we're trying to compete with other people in the community. We can actively purify ourselves because we're scared of hellfire. We can actively purify ourselves because we want Jannah, we want heaven, and we want those blessings in heaven. Or we can purify ourselves just for the sake of purification. لِلزَّكَاةِ. So if you flip the verse around, it's وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ فَاعِلُونَ لِلزَّكَاةِ. It's, what is the quality of a successful mu'min? Is that they're constantly active in order that they purify themselves for the sake of purification. That's why they're purifying themselves. Because they know that in order to spiritually develop themselves, they have to be alert. They have to be, for example, ready for that message to come up, right? That emergency broadcast alert. They have to be ready at all times. Whenever something happens, they're ready to handle it. So an example. People always ask, it happens in Q&A a lot. What are the signs for the Imam of the time? How do we prepare ourselves for the Imam's arrival, his reappearance? What do we do? And one of the answers is this. If the Imam were to come right now, would you be ready right now or not? Ask yourself honestly. If the Imam were to pop into the center right now, he says, I need XYZ individuals. Are you ready or not? Now, we would like to say that we're ready, but there's a lot of initial questions. When an individual walks in, let's just say he looks like what we imagine the Imam looks like, as far as turban and traditional clothing. But what about him would we be able to distinguish and identify to make sure we know that this is the Imam of the time or not? How would we know that this is actually the 12th Imam or a charlatan, a fake? Right now, in countries like Iraq and Iran, there are constantly individuals coming out in the public and claiming to be the 12th Imam and being put in jail because of this. When the occupation of an invasion of Iraq happened, right, when the Americans had invaded, many individuals took that opportunity to come out and say, I'm the 12th Imam, right? I remember as soon as it happened, one individual rose up from Basra, if I'm not mistaken. He had claimed that he was the 12th Imam, had made a huge army of supporters along with him, and they actually went to go attack Masjid Kufa, if I'm not mistaken, right? And they attacked Kufa, and they had to be stopped. If I'm not mistaken, a certain individual had to stop them, right? They had to use the forces that were there to stop these individuals. Imagine, a person who claims to be the 12th Imam is now going attacking masajid and centers within Kufa. But people fell for this. How do we know who would really be the 12th Imam or not? And there's another way we can think about this question. How can we really recognize who is a real scholar or not? We have many individuals who are coming to our communities, right, in every season, right? Muharram and the month of Ramadan, for this wilada, this shahada. What exactly is a criteria to invite somebody to come and speak on our behalf? To speak on behalf of Islam and the Imam? I've seen in many, many communities where, okay, the person, let's say, is a great orator, right? Their material is very organized. The points they make are very entertaining, very attractive. And people may think that this is actual Islamic information, but even that point, let's say we leave that aside. But simple things, like for example, when that person goes up and leads salah, right? They make clear mistakes in something as simple as their actual recitation, and people are none the wiser. I've been in so many communities where individuals are told to go ahead and lead the prayers with, the actual clerical Islamic garb, right? They have turbans on their head, and they're reciting, وَلَا الظَّالِينَ صِرَاطَ الَّذِينَ إِنَّا أَعْتَيْنَكَ الْكَوْثَرَ. And these are the people leading our prayers. And we know that one of the main criteria for somebody to lead prayers is that they have to be able to pronounce these things properly in Arabic. But our own community doesn't know, and they're following individuals like this. So if we can't figure out who should be the Imam of our prayers, how can we recognize the Imam of our time? We have to be able to work up, right, little by little. First figure out who's a credible scholar. Who is an authentic scholar? What should we look for when we invite scholars to speak on behalf of Allah and Islam and the Prophet and all these things? How do we know? And sometimes what happens here is we let our good intentions and our good akhlaq get in the way. What do I mean by that? We'll send a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, when a speaker or a scholar comes, I think most of us, we don't feel comfortable saying, okay, how many years have you been in Qom? What have you studied? What books are you doing? Who are your teachers? How far have you reached? Things like that. Most of us, I don't think, are very familiar with how the Hawza actually works. What happens in the seminaries? What exactly is the relationship between students and teachers? Why are there all these different schools? What do all these different schools specialize in? All these different maraji and ayatullahs that are there, what do they specialize in? If I say I'm going to X ayatullah and learning from him, what does that actually mean? You know, if somebody from here says, for example, that they're a medical doctor, now they might have a certificate, you know, like behind their desk, for example. That's one way of determining whether they're a credible doctor or not. But could you, for example, ask them, okay, what school did you go to? They may say, for example, they went to, let's say, Harvard Medical, and that might give you some idea, although I'm not saying that's the best criteria, but that's one criteria you can ask them, right? That's one type. But maybe even that's not enough. Because let's say you have two individuals, both of them went to Harvard Medical School. One of them, let's say, top of their class, all A's, 4.0 GPA. The other one just barely made it by with D's. Is that something that we should look at or not when determining whether we should trust them as our doctor? Is another thing that we should look at is, okay, let's say they both went to Harvard, but I also know that, you know what, grades and tests and exams and GPA, that's not really the best way to judge somebody. Maybe I should ask them some specific questions to see if I can understand how much do they really understand about the medical field. Now, of course, the problem is, if I don't know anything about the medical field, how can I test somebody's medical knowledge, right? And usually what happens is we take our own preconceived biases and notions and we ask a medical doctor about that. So let's say you are pro-vaccine and you ask a doctor, what's your view on vaccines? And they say, well, I'm pro. Say, so this is a real doctor, he's a good doctor. But if you're on the opposite side, if you're anti-vax, then what are you going to do? You'll ask the doctor, what is your view on vaccines? If they say, well, I'm pro, you say, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. This lady, she doesn't know what she's talking about. So one of the other things we have to be careful of is make sure that the criteria that we're using to determine who is a credible scholar or not is not our actual own criteria. Right? It should be criteria which we have gotten from the Quran and from the Ahlul Bayt. And I don't want to make a discussion specifically about that. This is something that we can think about as a community. You can discuss when you're inviting certain individuals to come. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The point was this. If we are looking to purify ourselves for the sake of purification, to actually purify ourselves, we all need our help. We all need somebody above us to help us figure out how to purify ourselves, right? We can't do it ourselves. If we want to get somebody who we feel is credible, we have to make sure we're asking, okay, what are their qualifications and what is their credibility? What kind of authority do they actually have? One of the best ways that we can do that as a community is to start to educate ourselves much more about Islamic knowledge, the Islamic sciences. To know what questions can we ask somebody that we're inviting, so that we know whether this person, okay, can we take from them Islamic history? Maybe. But should we take fiqh answers from them? Maybe not. Maybe this person's good in fiqh, but maybe they're not so good in philosophy or irfan. We have to be able to figure out what specialties and expertises and fields of research does an individual, student, or scholar have, and how do we know, based on a specific method of research, how do we know if we can rely on them or not? Now, we also want to talk about the idea of how do we actually now go and purify ourselves, right? Let's give some practical tips. You have a question? Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a good question, a tough one. So the sister was asking about, sometimes there are specific individuals who happen to have the clothes of a scholar, they wear the clothes of a scholar, and it seems to be clear to community members, at least to some community members, that this individual doesn't fit the criteria of a real scholar or a student of Islam. And even some organizations, let's say representatives of some of the maraji or other qualified organizations that represent the offices of the maraji, also say that, yeah, we don't certify this individual. So what are we supposed to do, right? Well, that's a tough question, obviously. So I think there's different ways that we can go ahead and approach this. So one is, of course, the easy one is on an individual basis. Know what can you take from the individual, what can you not take. So it should be obvious, if you know they're not qualified, to be very, very cautious about what information you take from that individual. The second is, if you have a good amount of information available and you know this individual is influencing others, if you can talk to that specific individual, like that actual scholar, then to try to have a conversation to see, okay, what is their side of the story, right? Now, sometimes that will happen, sometimes it won't happen. The other thing that we can maybe do is for our community to have a discussion. Is this person somebody we want to invite or not, right? And if it's clear that they shouldn't be invited, then, okay, we have to set that up as well and make sure that that person's not invited. Now, if the actual organizations themselves are not really stepping forward, then the most we can do is, as a community ourselves, make sure that we block and stop and forbid anything like this from penetrating our communities, right? Now, if, let's say, we have interactions with people who are being influenced by those individuals, that would be, again, a kind of exercise in how do we actually communicate with somebody that's being influenced by them. Because we have to be careful of completely shutting down and, causing fitnas when we shouldn't be causing fitnas. Because right now, we live in a time where this idea of being a celebrity scholar and speaker, it's at its peak, right? Simply somebody being on social media and being active on social media is enough for youth to be attracted by that individual, especially. Maybe elders, not so much, but the youth will be very easily attracted to these kind of personalities. Is that the adhan? 3 minutes? Okay. So inshallah, maybe I think we're going to have a Q&A maybe tomorrow night, we can expand a bit more on that. But generally, we should also learn how is it that we can communicate and understand differences of opinion. So if, let's say, somebody's attracted to the personality, how can I understand, okay, how are you benefiting from them? And then build bridges so we can figure out how can I maybe lead them to somebody who does their job better, right? Something like that maybe. So what we'll do tomorrow night then is we're going to try to go through the discussion on practical tips for purification, self-purification. And also, we'll see if we can also talk about the idea, how do we know, or another kind of major question that's asked, why do we even have to purify ourselves? Meaning this, why were we even created? Why did Allah even put us in this world to have to go through all these trials and tribulations and purification? Why didn't God just put us straight in heaven? So 2 things we'll try to discuss tomorrow is firstly, why were we created, purpose of creation, and then after we understand our purpose, then we can figure out, based on that purpose, how do we go and purify ourselves. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Yes. Yes, I answered it yesterday. You weren't here. I'll answer it again, inshallah, no problem. So the sister's question was about, we were talking about concentration and prayer, right? So as far as concentration, let's say I lose my concentration or I don't feel like my concentration was the best. I finish my prayer because you're not allowed to break it, right? I finish it and then later on, am I allowed to make it up or not? So most of the responses from most of the offices of the Maraji was that technically it's not haram. Technically speaking, it's not haram to do it again, but because there's nothing specific in the Sharia, there's no Quranic verse, there's no hadith to say that you're allowed to or you should do it again, there's no recommendation to do so. And some of the Marajas said there is no benefit whatsoever to doing so. So basically you'd be wasting your time doing an extra prayer. So what they say instead is they gave 2 pieces of advice. One piece of advice was that try your best to focus and get your focus on that one prayer that you have to offer. Now, if you can make it up again in Jama'ah, that's okay, that's allowed, right? Because that's specifically mentioned. If you did Furada, you can do it again in Jama'ah, that's fine. The other thing too is, if you really feel that after this wajib prayer, you didn't really have focus, you didn't like that, and you feel like you want to make something up, this is why they say Allah has made ta'aqibat available. Tasbih, right? These du'as, ziyarat. So this is where you can now fully concentrate and try to offer more concentration and make it up there. And very specific scholars have said, when you offer those 2 sajdas right after the salat is finished, this would be something that can make up for your lack of concentration. We have 1 more minute, I think. Is it 36 or 37? Is sign out? Okay. So we'll continue inshallah tomorrow. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.